Welcome everyone to Touchstone Center for Crafts. We are here in the Jewelry and Metalsmithing studio on campus. We're just going to walk around the studio a little bit before we get started here. Tonight Jessica is going to demo riveting for us. We're going to get started in just a little bit. Touchstone is a craft school out in Pennsylvania. We're the only residential craft school in this state. We have a bunch of different studios, and usually we'll have workshops that run throughout the summer, both 5-day workshops as well as weekend workshops. Our next online Zoom session is going to be on Thursday night. We are having Gerald Brown return as our Artist Happy Hour series, and that's on Thursday night at 7 p.m. So feel free to sign up on our website to see her talk about her work as well as her involvement in different arts organizations. So we're going to go ahead and get started. This is Jessica. She's here from Tennessee. And why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jessica. I recently graduated from Tennessee Tech University in Cookeville, Tennessee. So it's about halfway between Knoxville and Nashville, if that gives you kind of an idea of where it's at. And I was selected to be a Wingate Fellow this year. So part of my fellowship, I am working here at Touchstone as an intern. Right now I'm just kind of prepping some material to do our demo.
What material are you working with?
So I'm just working with copper right now, but I'm actually just cutting this shape out because this is such a thin gauge that you might not want to do this with your favorite pair of scissors, but you can get a dummy pair and just kind of use them for that. It's much quicker than sawing, and this material is such a pain sometimes to cut.
What gauge are you using?
Let's actually check it. .26. So some pretty thin stuff. I don't usually work this thin, but sometimes it's really good to work with other things and put them in different applications.
We do have a question from the comments. What does being a Wingate Fellow entail? Can you elaborate?
So the Wingate Lamar Fellowship is through, I believe it's the Center for Craft. It's out of Asheville, North Carolina. And they select 10 recipients each year, and they're awarded a grant of $15,000 to continue basically a craft research endeavor. And so they only pick 10 people a year, and I think there's usually about 100 people that apply in general, and you have to be nominated to even apply for it. So it's pretty cutthroat. Like, it's very competitive. So I'm really thankful for getting this opportunity, for sure.
Yeah.
So I've got, actually, I don't know if you can tell, but I roller printed these, and they're actually cicada wings.
You tilt it a little bit. It's hard to tell. There we go.
So I got 2 of those. I'm just kind of working on this second one here.
Did you use an actual cicada wing to create the imprint?
I did, actually. They were really, really prevalent around my school. So the craft center is on a peninsula on the lake, and it's about 30 minutes from the actual Tennessee Tech's campus. Yeah, I think that'll work. So got 2 wings. I'm going to put this one in the pickle. The pickle is just going to clean all this oxidation off the surface so that it looks shiny like this. I'll be right back. So kind of what I'm planning for is I have this strip, which has also been roller printed. It's just like an aluminum mesh that I got. And so it gave this really nice kind of texture to it. So I'm thinking I'm just going to attach both of them on here like so. One on each side. Just kind of go with it. But first, I'm probably going to dress these edges because they're a bit sharp.
For anyone viewing, feel free to post any questions that you might have down in the comments.
I'm just knocking off these corners right now so they're not so sharp. I'm just going to go over these edges. So I'm just chamfering these edges so they're a little bit beveled. And that kind of helps it look a little less just like stock that's been cut.
So what is this piece going to be?
I don't really know. It could be a little wall hanging. It could be a little pendant. I'm just kind of going with it. We'll see where it ends up. Sometimes I just start things and I don't really know where it's going to go until it just kind of unfurls itself. So now those edges are a little bit nicer looking. So we've got this piece, we've also got this one, could use some filing too. You have to be careful with this really thin stuff because if you even just like miss a stroke or even just dropping it, it can just kink it really bad and then it's almost impossible to get flat again. So I'm just knocking off this edge right here that was created when I cut this out initially with scissors. Okay, so now we've got those pieces done. We're going to do one of the rivets. So this is called a center punch, and the way that drill bits are made, there's a point at the end, and that's kind of where you seat it when you go in to drill. So what we're doing with the center punch is we're just making a little divot for the tip of this drill bit to sit in so it doesn't skate all over the surface. What do you think? Closer, farther apart, over here, more in?
You can have 2 wings?
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll grab the other one and we'll see where it's at. That pickle's pretty strong, so it's been cleaning them very fast. So it really does just take all that nastiness off. And it will oxidize again and turn black, but you can wax it to kind of mitigate that. It's not perfect, but it definitely helps. Now I'm just using some Scotch-Brite to kind of give it this matte kind of brushed finish so we can see what we're working with. So, 2 wings. I'm thinking maybe something like that. Maybe they'll be just right next to each other. But there's one and there's that. I promise I won't be filing all night. Just a little bit here and there. So what I'm doing right now too is bracing it against this pin because it's stationary and it actually helps you get a cleaner file line. I remember in university my professors were always like, don't be this person air filing because it's going to take 10 times longer and not be as accurate. Okay.
What are some different ways that you can apply riveting?
It really has a lot of applications. You can either just join 2 pieces together, or in some cases I've used it to actually make a little hinge. So if you could imagine just having these pieces together, and you don't set the rivet really, really tight, you just have it a little bit of play, and then these can just swing freely. I'm trying to think. You can also, I don't know if you can do that. You can make decorative rivets, so they're just kind of, they look nice on the surface as like embellishment. We'll go with that. So I love a good Sharpie. It's always really nice to have in the studio. This is something I use every day, and I always have to fight to find it because I'll pick it up and then set it somewhere else completely. So I'm going to go ahead and center punch these. And all it takes is one good hit. You don't have to try to force the wedge it all the way through, but it needs to get enough to make a noticeable imprint. And you want to do it on a steel block because if you imagine doing it on the wood is so soft that you're just going to bow it instead of actually making the indent. So always on steel blocks. So I've got my drill bit already put together in a bunch of. Okay. When making rivets, it's also key to make sure that your drill bit is straight and not at an angle because that's going to affect how the rivet sits in the piece. So it's just a very steady applied pressure and we got a hole. Just like that. And then there's this, I don't know if you can tell, but there's this little piece on the back where when the drill bit goes through, it leaves a little piece of the material. The best way to get rid of that without filing it and marring up your surface is to just take a slightly bigger drill bit. You just take it and run it in the back.
That's a cool tip. I didn't know that.
It's really handy because then you don't have to worry about filing the surface too much, and you just kind of get that burr off. Except I think I picked it too big of a drill bit because this is not working the way I wanted it to. Also, this material is so thin, it's so hard. There it goes. This is also a great way to countersink for your rivet. So if you want it to sit a little bit more flush instead of bulged out over the surface, you can kind of ream it out a little so it has a little bit of a place to go when you're setting the rivet. But just some simple twisting and you're done. Okay, got 2 wings. Let's see where they're gonna go here. Actually, I might move this over one. Also, shout out to Replogal Armory who made me this sweet chasing hammer. It's a Japanese style hammer. Okay. So now that I got my center punch marks for that, we'll drill this out. Okay. It's also important to take these burrs off the front. Sometimes it leaves a little bit of a burr because otherwise your piece might not sit flush against it. So, got the 2 holes. We've got these 2 wings. And this is the material I'm going to be using. It's just a brass tubing that I've bought. And, okay, so these, a lot of the times the sizes for the tubing isn't necessarily exactly the right size for your hole. And the thing about making rivet holes is that you don't want it to be really loose because that'll affect how you set your rivet. So if it's really loose and there's a lot of play, it can cause the rivet to set sideways, and then you'll just have to cut it out and start over again. So I have these handy little things called reamers. So what it does is it's just going to shave off a teeny tiny bit of that material to allow for that piece of tubing to go in without having to go to the next drill bit size. And these things are really handy if you're doing a lot of riveting or anything that really requires you to have a lot of really tight-fitting parts if they're round. And I just like to check it every few turns because sometimes it's real easy to go a little too far.
So did you measure what drill bit you needed to use according to the size of tubing?
So honestly, I just kind of picked one. So I took the tubing and I just kind of fit it inside these holes that the drill bits go into, and I found one that was close. It was the one that was just too small for it to fit in. And so once I did that, I used that bit, and then now I'm using this reamer because it's really hard to find exact sizes. And there's a ton of tubing out on the market that there's no consistency necessarily in terms of finding them for drill bit sizes. Though I wonder if I picked one that might be a little too small. And then you want to go back and forth on the sides too, because if you just do one side, it's tapered, the reamer is, so it might not be exactly the right size on the other side. Yeah, I think I need to go up one size a bit on this one. It's also key when you're putting drill bits in to make sure that they're inside the 3 jaws of this chuck, because otherwise you're in for a really bad time when you go to start that up. So, I'm actually going to do a little test hole here. See if this is going to be the right size. I think we have a winner. Okay, so I'm going to actually upsize these because they're a little too small. Let's try that again. See where this is at. Yeah, that's much closer. So I still have to ream. Ooh. Well, I have to ream it out, but I have a different reamer because this one that I bought is not quite the right size, but this is just a standard beading reamer that I just kind of keep around just in case. It can prove to be handy for a lot of different applications, especially in this moment. Okay, so there we go. That one fits. And this is just diamond coated, so it kind of is just doing the same thing, just maybe a little bit slower. Okay, so that's set. Now we move on to these. And there's so little material here, this will just take a couple seconds. Okay, so now we've got those set. Just gonna countersink those a little bit. pattern kind of makes it hard to use the drill bit on. Okay, now got all these pieces together, and now we can cut the tubing. So for the tubing, you really I just eyeball it. You can be really fancy and use calipers and really get an idea of how thick it needs to be, but the rule of thumb is generally a little, it's like 1.5, I believe, over your altogether material thickness, so yeah. So this itty bitty piece of tubing is what we're going to use. And I have to make 2 of them. So I like to use what's called a miter block. These are steel blocks that you can buy. And they have these little grooves in them. You can put your pieces in there and tighten it down so it'll hold it while you're cutting it. Because otherwise it would be really, really not fun to hold this little tiny piece of tubing. And you can file on it because it's hardened steel. Now you don't want to use really, really hard files on these because it will scratch them and it can mar the surface, but in my lifetime that probably won't be an issue. So, got our little teeny tiny piece of tubing. Just going to go ahead and make another one. So I'm just filing this flush so that it doesn't have any irregularities. And that's the other thing, is making sure that ideally you want to have your tubing or your rivet material be squared off on either end, because then you ensure that the material is going to move evenly and consistently when you're going to set the rivet heads. You don't necessarily have to do that, but it definitely makes it a lot easier. So I also have a set of these cut burrs. They're really good for just taking off that little burr on the edge. So
You said this tool is called a miter block?
yes. So it's called a steel miter block. So it has a 90-degree and then it has a 45-degree angle. You can see on the edge here, 90, 45. I've been using it a lot to make these walls, so I've been making 2 L's and then soldering them together using the 45. Ta-da! 2 tiny pieces of tubing. So I've got this piece of material. It might actually be a little too tall for this, but it's kind of basically a riveting plate. So when you're setting the rivet, you want to make sure that the part on the bottom, because you're going to be setting the top rivet first, you want to make sure that the stuff on top, let's see if I can do this with this plate. So it supports it from the back side. And then you can just set this freely. Although I think this one's a little too tall for that. You can just use any material really, as long as it's not too much. You're just kind of supporting it so that you have material to work with on the other side. It's pretty close. Yeah, that's much better. So. I'm going to start with what's called a dapping tool. So, usually use these in a dapping block, but for now, I'm going to use it to start this rivet head. Just a little bit of some light taps to get it started. So, you kind of see how it's bulging out from the center. So now that I've got it started, I'm going to go in with my actual riveting hammer and start knocking it down a little bit more. So as I'm going, I'm kind of rocking my hand to kind of go in a circular motion and kind of angling it so it hits it not quite square, but just a little bit less. And this kind of takes practice to get it without nicking everything, but so that side's pretty set. So now we're just going to flip it over and go to the other side. And again, start with the dapping tool. And now that one side is set, you can take this plate away and kind of okay. So now I got one rivet, and it's all set. So it's captured the wing. For a second, I thought I put it on backwards, but if it's loose enough, you can turn it around.
Okay, we're good.
So this is kind of gnarly on the edges, so I'm actually going to take one of these clippers, so I have the right size. I can just kind of run it around the exterior of, I think I need one bigger. Rivets also tend to have sometimes sharp edges on them, so it's kind of nice to have these little burrs where you can just kind of slip it over it and clean it up pretty quickly. These are things I use on a daily basis. They've just made my life a lot quicker whenever I make things. It just cuts out so much little tedious time.
So can you create a rivet that makes the pieces stationary as well as moving?
It really depends on how tight you make it. I mean, I would recommend either one or the other. So you would either have a really loose rivet, or this one's probably could be more, but it's captured enough that this wing is not going to come off at any point. So bad thing about tiny things is sometimes they're really hard to work with. And you also have to worry about dropping them. So again, I'm just supporting this so that there's an amount of rivet on the top that I can get started. Got my dapping punch here. trying to make sure it's pretty straight on. See, this guy's a little bent. That's another thing about this, it just bends if you look at it. Okay, that's a little bit better. Okay, so now that that rivet's set, this one's a little bit tighter than the other one already. So now we can just move on to the back. Yeah, I think we got it set. It's a lot tighter than this one. I'm just going to take this and clean it back a little. And you can put these in your flex shaft and use them to ball up like the end of wire or even tubing. But I prefer to do things by hand if I don't have to use the flex shaft, because using power tools is nice and all, but sometimes it can make you mess up faster. And that has come from many, many years of personal experience. Sometimes it pays to be slow and patient. And then I have these setting burrs, which I'm going to go back in and just kind of touch up the center of those because they got a little bit wonky. This is just going to round it out, make it look a little bit neater. All right, so we've got our pieces riveted. The wings still kind of move.
Very cool.
So it's a really easy way to apply different pieces of metal without having to solder them together. And that becomes really critical if you're doing pieces that are very complex and require a lot of steps and components. Can really save you a lot of stress. And I might actually go and patina these if we've got time.
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna clean them up a little bit. I've already pickled them, and I have touched them a little bit, but I'm not too worried about that excess oil. Typically, you would want to make sure that when you're patining anything, you want to make sure that you don't have any of your oils on your hands, because it can prevent the patina from sticking, and then it can cause it to flake later on, and it might be inconsistent in the surface.
What's a patina?
It's a way to add surface coloration to your material. So right now we're just going to be using what's called liver of sulfur, and it's just a pretty basic common patina that most metal studios have and a lot of people use. It's just basically an oxidizer, so it's just going to make it very, very dark. You can get some really interesting colors and arrays of colors. So we got our wings. Actually, let's see if we have some wire just kicking around. So we don't have to worry about having our hands all over it. So, come back here to the sink area. I've already got some stuff. So I'm just putting this on a wire so we can free hang it into the patina bath. So it usually goes in these little chunks. You just can take these little chunks and put them in some water, but it smells like rotten eggs. Just gonna put that out there. I know we don't have smell-o-vision, but it's there. Ideally, you really want hot water because the hot water is going to make the reaction happen much quicker. I mean, you can still use lukewarm and it'll do just the same. So waiting on that to dissolve, I'm going to grab some tongs.
Is this toxic?
I mean, you don't want to get it on your hands as much as possible. Probably long term it can be really bad for you. But as long as you're not actively touching it with your hands a lot and you're not breathing in a whole bunch, you should be fine.
Is there a certain color that you want the solution to be?
It really just depends on how, like, you can make it really, really strong. So this is not necessarily weak, but not super strong. But I've seen it as dark as, like, a very, very, very dark kind of yellow-brown. And I think that is just going to cause the reaction to happen a lot faster. So you can still get a lot of the same colors even using a more weak solution like this. It might take a lot longer. So this is what it looks like brushed. Not really a lot going on, but and that's just one dip. So there is a lot of inconsistencies with the surface, but the key with using liquid sulfur is you don't want to dunk it if you're going for a very, very dark kind of black. You don't want to dunk it all at once because it is kind of just a surface thing. So if you do it successive times, you're building up the layers. It's kind of like adding a layer of paint. So now it's really, really dark. It's kind of a raveny blue color. We can keep putting it and just kind of see where it gets. But typically it's going to stay that raveny blue, and then if you wax it, it kind of darkens it more. And brass does not really take to liver sulfur, so you don't have to worry about it taking, because we still have our brass rivets. They're very stark in comparison. So what I'm going to do is actually ask you to trade spots with me. We're going to go over here. I'm just going to rinse it off. So I think this is a good amount of coloration for what we're going to be doing. So I've got what's called a brass brush, and it's just a bunch of brass bristles. I'm just going to go and maybe knock off a little bit of this. So this makes an excellent way to shine things as well. So now I'm going to switch over to Scotch Brite and see if that, yeah. So I'm just trying to knock off some of that because there are some little indents in the veining. I don't know if we'll be able to see them too much, but we'll just kind of knock off a lot of that excess. And it'll kind of show the cells of the wings. This pattern kind of reminds me of a fishnet.
Mm-hmm.
I think that just about does it. Beautiful. Some little wings.
So does a lot of your work reflect nature sort of themes?
It does a lot. I'm really fascinated with collecting objects from nature and preserving them, either for my own collection or just to put on display for other people to look at.
Great. I think we'll take a look at some of your work you have sitting out over here. So these are a few pieces she has in progress. So it looks like there's some lunar moth. Is this snakeskin?
It is. So it's snakeskin in that one container, and then the next one is, I believe, it looks like a hydrangea, but I think it's in the same family. It might not be exactly. And then I found that blue jay feather on my way. So you can kind of see that there's that clear film, and what I'm trying to do is capture those objects inside of the acetate. So it's the same stuff you use for projectors, and you know, back in school you would see your teachers drawing on them and project it onto the walls. So that's kind of what I'm using to be sort of a window kind of effect.
Cool. What are you working on here?
So I'm just working on this compartmentalized kind of series where kind of working on cabinets of curiosities, and that's kind of where I'm at right now in a lot of my work. Just making these little compartments for special objects to sit in. I haven't decided how they're going to be displayed, either in a cluster like this, or they might actually be in succession by size. So it might be the big one, this tall one, and then the two small ones soon after.
Mm-hmm.
And this piece was part of that, but I kind of retrofitted it for something else I'm working on, where it's this vial holder, and it's going to have a frame around it, and these two little knobs are going to attach to the ring, and I believe it's going to swivel the tube out so you can take it out and look at it. Haven't really worked all that out yet, but it's in progress. And these are some of my pieces from a previous, just when I was in school and kind of experimenting with things. So the surface is etched. I don't know if you can tell, but I took photos of dogwoods and I made a repeating pattern inside Photoshop and then applied it to the surface using a material called Press and Peel Blue and etched it so that it showed up in the surface more.
Oh, yeah.
And this was my first ever box in terms of making a triangle too. The lid only goes on one way. Not that good, but... And I like to call this cyborg chickadee. My former professor told me it looks like a chicken, so I kind of just roll with it. Just a little pillbox you could carry around. There's a CZ set in the top. And then this is just for thumb action. And then I was working on this line of work where I was collecting these fossils from Middle Tennessee creek beds, and they are actually fossilized crinoids. So it was a plant, a sea plant, because Tennessee was underwater millions of years ago. And when the oceans receded, all of these plants died off and were petrified under years and years and years of sediment layers. So I've been going out to creek beds and collecting them and kind of working on this line of work of just capturing them.
And you're using rivets in these pieces?
These are all tube rivets. So in this case, I actually just soldered it to the back plate instead of setting it all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
and then just set it on top like you would a normal rivet.
Very cool. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jessica, for showing us how to do a riveting demo.
Thanks
and
for stopping by.
Also patinas. That was awesome. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
All right. Just a heads up, we are going to have on Thursday night a return of our Artist Talks happy hour with Gerald Brown. She is a ceramic artist, and she's going to be talking about her work as well as her involvement in her ceramics community. All right, and that's going to be available on Zoom, and you can sign up on our website, touchstonecrafts.org. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. It was a pleasure to have you on.